So, thank you to you, all of you. I have to apologize to all of you because this is my first talk in English, so please don't lapidate me, don't throw rocks, bottle, bricks, or something like that. NGRX, well, that's me. I'm, as Eduardo says, a consultant, a trainer, and also I teach at school computer science. In this talk, I want to talk with you about NGRX. Raise your hands if you already use or at least know NGRX. Quite complex. So, what is NGRX? NGRX is a library that allows us to manage the state inside our application. It's based on Redux and RxJS. And right now, it's the de facto standard of the managing state inside big, complex application. Why we need to use, maybe need to use a state manager inside our application, our Angular application? Well, basically, we could use services right now, signals and stuff like that, to manage all of our state. But when the complexity of our application starts growing, it's very difficult to maintain our application maintainable with a lot of performance and with without unnecessary render. So, in this case, NGRX helps us to do all of this. How to install? With an npm, or if you want, there are the schematics inside the Angular. When we need to use NGRX, you have to add some provider inside our configuration. Basically, the provide store initialize NGRX. Then, using provide state, we declare all of our reducer that we spoke in a minute. It's possible to declare the reducer inside the provide store, but it's not considered a good practice. So it's better to use provide state. That is useful for root state than for feature state. Last but not least, provide store DevTools help us to adding inside our application a connector for some tool called Redux DevTool that with this tool we can see all the action dispatched, all the change in our state, and rate the store and so on. A lot of cool stuff. This is how works NGRX. Basically, we have a store that is a big JavaScript object. It's based on the single source of truth pattern, so there is only one store. Then, through selector, we grab a slice of our state in reactive way. So when the store changes, the selector not dispatch, but next inside an observable that update our component. When a component wants to change something in our store, the component dispatch an action that call a reducer that mutate our state. There are also effects that allow us to manage all the asynchronous part of our application. So basically, the main four actors of our NGRX are these four: action, reducer, selectors, and effects. Starting from the first one, actions. Actions are simply a plain old JavaScript object that implement the action interface. So this interface basically is an interface with a single property type of type string that inform the NGRX store, so which is the action that has dispatched. Usually the type of our action is declared like this. So we have a key surrounded by square brackets that identify our feature, our business unit, and then a label that tell us what the action does. We can make the action in this way, so declaring a simple object, or in a more convenient way, using the factory create action that do the same stuff, but in a simplest way. We can also use create action group that allow us to create more than one action in one time. So in this case, the source field is the key of our actions, and then in the events declare all the action that we want. If the action don't have any props, so then grab information from the dispatcher, we have to declare with the empty props. Instead, if you want to push a value, we have to declare, as before, props and then the object. Little note, in any case, use an object as a props. Don't use primitives, number, or something like that, or array, because inside create action, grab all the field, all the properties inside the object, and put inside the action. So do a destructor and a spread operator. But what the action do inside inside NGRX? Basically nothing. Actions are simply a message that someone dispatcher, in particular the dispatch meter of our store, our NGRX store, the actions are dispatched, and then someone else listen for that action and, for example, mutate our state. Who mutate our state? The reducer. The reducer are a pure function, so they don't have closure or side effects, that mutate our state when the actions are dispatched. For register our reducer, you need to declare inside our configuration with the provide state, and this is an example of a reducer. It's a simple function with two parameters. The first is the state, the second is the actions, and switching between the type of our action, we can change our state accordingly. A note, a reducer that, of course, is implement a reducer pattern, need to return the entire state, not only the simple change. So, sorry, I forgot this part. Another way, more convenient to create a reducer is use the factory create a reducer that do the same stuff as before, but it's in a more compact way. As I say a second ago, we need to mutate our state in an immutable way. Sorry for the speak joke. So what's the problem about that? If we have the state like the 2 slides ago, with only one properties, it's not a problem. We simply return a new object with the same property. But in case of our state start growing, we need to return all the properties and return the properties mutated, leaving the other one like was before. In this way, or in more elegant way, using the spread operator, and in a couple of minutes, we see how to manage more complex stuff. Selectors. So selectors are, again, pure function that pick a slice of our state. Why use selector? Basically, the store is unobservable. So we know how to use RxJS. We can use, for example, a map to grab a part of our state. Yes, it's true, but in this case, every single change inside our store emits in this counter one observable. So maybe I don't want to update my counter if the user changes his avatar, for example. We can prevent this using, for example, the stick until change operator, but again, in this case, this works, so the counter changes only when the value changes. But if I subscribe more than one time, all the observable chains are reprocessed for each subscription. So this could be a problem if in some condition I do some long stuff inside our chain of operator. With the select, with this method provided by NGRX, we have all of this feature out of the box, battery included. So use select. For create a selector, you can also use the create selector factory that take another selector, a feature selector, so the apparent selector, so sorry for the mismatch, and then a predicate to grab a slice of our selector. Or, in a more convenient way, we can create this feature selector using the create feature selector that take a string to slice a part of our state, then we can specify the type like using a generics, and then we don't need the upstate, that is the part, in this case, totally useless. Finally, for the selector can take up to 8 parent selector and combine it together, like the compute method that Daniela tell us this morning. In this case, I grab two select, one for the configuration of the user, one for the weather that I take from, for example, an API. Then, if the temperature is, if the configuration is in metric fashion, so Celsius, return the temperature like this. Instead, the user wanted to use the imperial unit, calculate the temperature as Fahrenheit. Effects. So effects is the way of NGRX we manage a synchronous event. To register our effect, we use the provide effect method, passing as an argument all the effects. If we register more than one time the same effect, it's not called twice, so there is a logic inside with a map, basically. And, of course, this is the main problem that effects solve. For example, I have an action that I use to load some items, an array of items, inside my store. The reducer listens for this action, and then when it's dispatched, put those items inside my store. I can do like this. It's not a problem. When in my component someone click on the button, call the method load data, then I grab from my dependency injection service this API service, get the items as an observable of array of items, then subscribe to that observable, retrieve the items, and then put it inside the store. It's not a problem, but imagine if we can do a stuff like this. So simply dispatch an action, and someone else with some obscure magic grab the data from the server, put inside our store without do nothing. This is what effect does. For example, at the bottom, there is an example of an effect we can create using the create effect, then use the load item effect, in this case, inside the provide effect. The create effect are basically a chain of observable operator. In this case, I use the observable action provided by NGRX. With the operator of type, I filter all the actions that are dispatched for the type that I want, in this case, load, and then, after some asynchronous stuff, remap my observable to an action of success. Usually, when work with the effects, we split our action in at least 3 parts. The action that trigger our effect, an action when the effect resolve in a successful way, and then another action when it fails. This is the complete example. Grab the action load, switch map to the observable of the HTTP client request. Then, if everything goes fine, remap to the load success action. If something goes wrong, remap to load failure, passing the message of our HTTP request. A note, if you want to use effect without declare a class, you need to add as a flag at the bottom of your effect, functional equal true. Instead, something don't work. I don't remember which is the error, but better way is like this. Also, the classical approach, so grab action and return action, we can grab action and return nothing. So setting dispatch to false, we can easily do some side effects inside the effect, so it's tricky. For example, I want to show an alert, a very pretty alert of the browser. I don't need to grab any other information, so I put dispatch to false. And also, I can use something different to the action observable. In this case, to pull from an API something that changes in our server, I use an interval that periodically call our API, and then if the status has changed, update something in the store. A moment to drink, sorry. So, how many minutes did I have? So, as a consultant, I work in a bunch of projects that using NGRX, and I saw a lot of strange stuff. I reassume what I saw in a 5-tip for you that I hope that help you to make a better code. Tip number 1, put all the state inside your store. An example, we have an application with a lot of components, and at that point there is an alert component that simply show a box in the center of our screen. This component is driven by a service. In this case, if the observable inside the service return true, the model are showed. The alert are shown. Instead, it's not visible. Other than that, there is a button to hide my alert, to dismiss my alert, and the alert service is made like this. There is a behavior subject, made visible from outside as observable, so it's not possible to change the behavior next to the behavior subject from outside, but there are also 2 methods for show and hide our alert. So this is not a problem with this code, but this behavior subject is a state. Do you have already NGRX in your application? Why you need to put another state in a different part? Put everything inside your state, and then you can manage understand with the Redux dev tool when something changes in a wonderful way. So when I propose this, one of my customers says, "Oh, there's a lot of the refactor because we call this method inside 100 components, blah 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 blah." So the same stuff that I listen every time. And the solution is pretty simple. Instead of using the behavior subject, I grab a slice of our store with a selector, and instead of removing those two methods, simply dispatch an action inside this method. So it's back compatible with all the stuff that we already have, plus we can dispatch those actions in another way, for example, in an effect or something like that. Tip number 2, don't be afraid of a big state. So, look at that state. It's not so big, but if I want to change the field something in an immutable way, it's quite tricky. I have to do something like this. So, destructor all the state, create a new property foo that have all the property of foo as before, and then a new property foo2 with all the property of 2 like before, and so on, until I reach the leaf, my something, and change it to true. We can do something better. For example, like this. I made a clone of an entire state, a deep clone, then change something that I want, and then return a cloned state. I can use structured clone or really fast deep clone or JSON parse of JSON staticify. Every approach is the same. The main problem of this approach is, in this case, all the states are changed. So when I call this action change something, every selector next a new observable. This is not so good if you have a lot of stuff inside your application. A better solution is use a library like Immer. Immer is a library that are based on proxy, JavaScript proxy, and then using this produce function, passing the state and a predicate that change our state in a mutable way, so as we are used to do outside NGRX, it returns the same change, but in a mutable way. So all I have to do is do the same stuff that I used to do in JavaScript. Tip number 3, learn RxJS. Especially for the effect. For the selector, yeah, it's important, but we have to use a couple of functions. But for the effects, it's a game changer. For example, this example, sorry, but it was stole by Michele half an hour ago. I have an effect that delete an item from a list. Of course, I injected the action, injected the API service, filter for the action delete, then using a flattening operator, invoke the method delete item by ID, and then if everything goes fine, delete success, then if there is an error, delete failure. What occurs if I change this merge map with another flattening operator? We know there is 4 flattening operators, basically. We can do whatever operator we want. And imagine that our user click nervously on the button delete. As Michele says before, If I use the merge map, I grab all the requests merged together. So I try to delete the same object many times, as many the request as many dispatch of delete action I do. With the concat map, I do the same stuff, but every single request have to wait the previous request has to complete. So I give the same behavior. So, but if my request take a second to execute, and I click 5 times with the concat map, I have to wait 5 seconds to finish all my queue. Instead, if I use a switch map and I click many times, all the requests following cancel the previous request, unsubscribe the observable, then when an HTTP observable are unsubscribed, is considered by the propagating an abort controller, an abort controller, basically. Last but not least, if I use correctly, in this case, exhaust map, until the request of my delete item by ID is not complete, all the other requests are ignored. So I prevent to delete so many times. Another interesting example, imagine that if you have a toaster, the classic box that appears on the top right corner of our site, managed by our NGRX. So there is a selector for the visibility of our toaster and another selector for the message that appear. Then there is a button that, when clicked, dispatch an action, dismiss toaster, sorry. Our boss asks, I want that if the user don't interact for 2 seconds, the toaster disappears automatically. How to do with an effect? 1 line of code. I take sorry, this is the reducer, so easy. I take the same action that show the toaster, then delay for the time that I want, and then remap to the action that dismiss the toaster. 1 line of code, so easy. Tip number 4, don't limit your effect to emit a single value. In every single code base that I put hands on, the behavior of the effect is this one. We grab an action, process something asynchronously, then return an action. But we are working with observable. That is not a problem, it's not observable. Can manage more than one emission in the same observable. For example, if I do this stupid effect that grab an action, full action, then switch map to the observable obtained by an array, and then remap the result in a full action success action. What can I get? Something like this. With 1 emission of full action, I give 3 emission of success. So I used this feature to do something very interesting. For example, another API request. These API requests are pretty slow, so what we have to do? We have to put at least a spinner, a preloader, something that inform our user that they have to wait. And how we can do? In this way, using a tap that invoke a service, spinner service, that show our spinner, and then when the API complete, hide our spinner. But we saw before, we can also use actions. So I dispatch an action show to show the spinner, and then an action hide to dismiss the spinner. But look at that. We have an effect that take action, return action, and in the middle, I use a different way to put outside action. Quite a mess. So what we can do? Something like this. So when I switch map to the observable of the API, with the inner pipe, I remap the result when it comes in an action load success. But start the inner observable with a spinner action show, and then when the HTTP request complete, with a spinner action hide. Last tip, be aware of dispatch false. There's nothing wrong with this code. I have something to do synchronously, for example, and I don't want to manage other action and do this effect with the dispatch false. But instead of doing this, it's possible to do something like this. I invoke my do something method inside a switch map, and then return a never observable. It's not a problem that never, of course, never emit value and never complete. Because when another action comes from foo action, from the action observable, automatically the switch map unsubscribe the previous observable and make it a new one. So everything was fine, but this approach allowed me to have a degree of one more degree of freedom. For example, if the method do something in some condition broke, for example, raise an exception, throw in an error, I can do something like this. For example, put in a try catch, if everything goes fine, return never, so never emit anything. Instead of an error, I emit an action that notifies me what the error is. Another interesting example. In this case, I want to save a file. I want to save a file with the file system access API. So, show the save modal, take a writable stream, write the data, then flash everything inside the file. Pretty simple. In case everything goes fine, I return true. Instead, if the user aborted, so click cancel in the pop-up, I return false. In any other error, I throw again the error. In this case, I manage this stuff like this, using a switch map. Of course, save file in this case return a promise, but we know that switch map and the other threading operator manage everything that is observable like without declare anything. So I use a promise inside an observable flow. So in this case, I obtain an observable with a single emission that everything goes fine, so res is true. I return an action success, so for example, showing a toaster, a pop-up that, okay, I saved the file. If the user cancels the saving, I return never. Then, if something goes wrong, for example, our disk on the PC is full, that throw an error, I give an error, the observable throw an error, and then return a failure action. I think I'm done. Thank you for your patience, and
thank you. Any question for Enrico? Remember, it's the first time he's speaking in English at a conf, so blast him with questions.
I'm terrified about the moment.
We have a lot of solution built in Angular for sharing, for persisting data between components like behavioral subject, services provided.
Yep.
When do you draw the line? When do you say, okay, now we need NGRX? Or you are default on the NGRX? I don't know.
Well, the best solution is choose NGRX at the startup of your application. The application is young, because after a couple of months of develop, maybe it's quite difficult to integrate in your code base. But by my honest opinion, when more than one components interact one each other without following the tree shape, so there is no parent component
Input and output.
Yeah, basically, yeah. When you in React we say we lift up the state. So when you can't put a global state on the top of your component, but you need to use the same state spread on many components, NGRX are a good solution.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions? No, so I think we're done. So thank you, Enrico.